Start. Beautiful. We'll give everybody another minute and then thank you for the link to Google Notes. And then we will get started. In the meanwhile, while people are coming in, we are going to launch a poll based on the topics that we have out here to see which ones are you more interested in hearing about. You can again choose two. So that way, as we go through our conversations, I know what to spend the most time on because really, any one of these topics could have its whole hour, and we're trying to cram a whole lot into 1 hour. Alrighty, so I think we will get started. We'll start with my intro and then we'll move on to yours. And then hopefully everybody will have joined us by the time we finish the intros. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us today for our fourth in our series of webinars for this year. The goal is to be action oriented, to help you understand things about running your nonprofit that you may or may not know about. Definitely to be an asset in you and your organization's continued growth. That is what we are all about, is helping organizations run better. And there's like just so much detail, so many details in running a nonprofit that it's a little ridiculous. I feel like, nonprofits are always bootstrapped and low on money, but here we have all the regulations requiring them to operate effectively, which just is they should, I feel like the government should just pay people to have a part-time staff member just taking care of it all. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist, but we do have some things that can help you. This, in a sense, is one of the hardest but most effective webinar that we've done so far because these are topics that people don't really understand as much. And I want you to walk away with a better understanding, to not be scared of it. I want it to become a little more approachable so that you can walk away having a handle on something new that will make you a better, more knowledgeable leader. So as we go through this, we may have some polls. We definitely are going to have action items for every section that we talk about because I want you to be able to take what you're learning and immediately apply it. I will be sending out a survey next week on Wednesday to see if you've done it, what you've done, and how it's worked for you, because the best way to progress is to learn about things and do them right away. Um, and in the chat, there is a link to the Google Docs that has our notes. Laura is going to be taking notes as we go through it, and we'll share her screen with her notes once we get started. So if you haven't already, answer please what your topics most interest are so that we can make sure to spend the most time on those. And it looks like the financial statements and budget development are winning so far. And I know we had a comment also about managing expenses. So with that, we are going to move into introducing our panelists. So I am going to let you all introduce yourselves because you'll do a far better job than I will. We're going to start with you, Lena.
Okay, thank you, Dina. My name is Lena Ludwig, and I am Executive Director at Logistically Nonprofit Services. Logistically has been around for a few years. We work exclusively in the animal protection space. We basically offer all the back office tools and tips you would need to run a proficient and efficient back office. And you're right, there's so much that goes into it, and we're happy that we're able to lend a hand to our participating members of our platform.
Well, thank you for being here. Jim.
Thank you, Dina. Happy to join. Jim McCormick with Your Part-Time Controller. YPTC partners with nonprofits providing high-level accounting and fiscal management on a flexible part-time basis. Our services range from fractional CFO to bookkeeping, but really with an emphasis on providing timely, accurate, and relevant financial information. It's one thing to provide a set of financial reports. It's another thing to tell the story behind the numbers, which YPTC has been doing for over 30 years. Our team becomes an extension of your organization, helping you stay audit ready, make data-driven decisions, and most importantly, help you focus on your missions. with over 2,000 clients across the country and 14 offices. 97% of our clients are nonprofits. We are indeed the nonprofit accounting experts.
You
Thank you.
definitely are. Yeah. Thank you, Melody.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dina. I work for Wagner CPAs, which is a public accounting firm that's been around over 75 years with a very strong commitment to the nonprofit community. And the partners have supported my unique position in the firm where I get to do education for nonprofits as well as advisory work. We also offer other obvious CPA services, etc. But that nonprofit passion is evident throughout the firm.
Yes, and we've had the opportunity to work with Wagner and Melody, so thank you for that. Mike, pass it on to you.
All right. Well, good to be here, everyone. My camarada. I am a managing partner and certified financial planner with Tide Creek Financial Group. We have a wide array of both clients and services, one of them being in the nonprofit sector. And really, what we do is we serve as a financial coach and trainer for our clients, as well as a sounding board. We put a lot of emphasis really understanding what the vision, what the mission is, what are the goals and objectives that you're looking to achieve, because the numbers, yes, they're important, but they're just on a page. But when you truly understand what is driving you and what is driving the organization, we can give much better financial advice and guidance. So good to be here with this stellar panel.
Yeah, thank you all. I am excited for this. And one thing that I always very often tell people is that the finances should tell the story of your organization. You should be able to look at the numbers, see, oh, this is where you spent money. This is what you're trying to do. This is the program that you're supporting. Instead of people approaching the finances, I mean, like I see a lot of numbers and I don't know what it means, and my accountant tells me to do this, and it's just like something scary. If it's not a book that you can read, then either you need help reading it, but most likely you probably need a little bit of help looking at your finances. Maybe the person doing your finances tends to overcomplicate it. Ask for it to be simpler. Ask for it to be something that you can be on top of, that you can own. I very often say that operations is like the skeleton of the organization. Finances are the blood. Finances make things happen. Without money, nothing happens. And there are a lot of controls on it, and there are a lot of things to think about. And it's likely things you haven't necessarily thought about before because we ended up in this situation, not because we have finance degrees or business degrees. So it needs to be accessible, relevant, managed, integrated. And that's the kind of financial management that we all aim to provide. That's why we created our financial management program. That's the way Jim, Mike, Melody, Lena, that's how we're looking at it. So with that, knowing these things are a little bit more challenging for people. If you could show someone three numbers to explain the organization's financial health, what would those three numbers be? Let's start with Mike.
Mm, I would say gross revenue,
Hmm.
um, uh, gross revenue, net operating income, and net profit.
Gross revenue. Can you explain those? Net operating income and net profit.
Hmm. Yeah, so the gross income numbers are important, because as you were saying, Dina, like this is the lifeblood. This is what is driving the organization and its mission, and really having an understanding of where your income is coming from. What are the sources of that income and that revenue, and using metrics to gauge what that will look like moving forward to allow you and your board of directors to make strategic decisions around increasing that gross revenue number. Um, as you said in the survey, as well as the question on the side, really understanding what your expenses are, and understanding the correlation between your expenses and the revenue is really important. Are those expenses operating or are those expenses driving revenue? And then the profit. Um, Knowing at the end of the day that this is the bottom line number. Once everything has come in, once everything has gone out, and we know this is what's left, that's important as well.
Hmm.
Um, but I'll pause there so I can
I
give
want
other
to hear,
people.
Jim, what you think. You're working with the more day-to-day finances.
Yeah, I mean it's and
And
part of
Laura,
my
if you don't mind sharing your screen, that would be great so everyone can see what you're typing. A lot of these terms are probably going to fly over people's heads. Thanks. Hmm.
yeah, no, absolutely. And part of my role at YPTC is sales, and I do business development. But from the sales perspective, I assess potential new clients as they come in and take a look at their 990. And I go through a series of exercises each client that I look at. Um, for the nonprofit clients, one of the first things is net assets, and look at it as a whole, but also the restricted versus without restrictions. Um, it's if they're heavily based on restricted net assets, that means there's a lot tied up in their specific programming, and it's funds that they cannot use. Uh, I'll look at cash, and cash is king. It's always king. It's always going to be king. Cash is huge, right? So, do you have enough cash in your accounts to cover your restricted net assets? And what is that ratio? And then it's overall liability. So, taking a different approach to Mike, the P&L side versus the balance sheet side. Um, the liabilities, everything is subjective. Everything is there's again, like as you said earlier, and I said too, there's a story behind the numbers. So just trying to be able to take a quick look, understand where we are high level, and then really start poking at those accounts, and you'll get into the P&L and the gross profit and all those
Hmm.
areas as
Hmm.
well. So yeah, if I had to choose three numbers, net assets, cash, and overall liabilities.
Yeah, I know when we usually do our monthly reports, we take a look at the profit and loss because that just tells you what did you spend and what did you bring in. I guess those would be my two. And the third is on the balance sheet. Like it tells you all your assets, liabilities, so you see where do we stand. Those should be your favorite reports in your software. Lena.
Let me unmute. Yes, of course, I'm in agreement with the other reports and numbers that you need to look at. Cash on hand, I think, is so important. It literally shows you how many months of operation you have until income stops. So that's really important to have those operating reserves and the cash on hand number. Another number that I think that many nonprofits don't pay attention to when it comes to explaining your organization's financial health is your donor retention rate and the revenue diversity ratio. So you'll be receiving, if you're receiving your donations from just one or two sources, that can make your organization very vulnerable. So we want to make sure that there's diversity there. And then retaining the donors is cheaper to retain them than finding new ones. So you want your retention rate to be ideally 50% or higher with your donor retention. So those numbers I think are also important.
Hmm. And those are good numbers. Melody, would you have any other numbers that you look for? Or you think everybody got them?
I if you're not, if you don't have that sustainability, you can't progress further and you can't continue to have that mission impact and grow.
Okay, missed the first half of your sentence. What was it? Sorry,
Having operating reserves.
operating reserve. Yeah, that is something that I tell people. I'm curious. I didn't put this in our prep questions, but what do you think a good operating reserve is? Like people are trying to fundraise. How much money are they trying to fundraise for? What do you think, Melody?
Um, I think the operating reserve needs to be tied to your cash flow cycle. I mean,
Hmm.
some organizations have reimbursables, and so they have a greater need up front.
Hmm.
Some have cyclical natures, etc. At a minimum, my advice is always having 3 months, but
Hmm.
I personally like having 6 months. And the other thing I like out of the things we said was talking about that cash availability. So if you have an audit, look at your liquidity, cash and liquidity footnote, because that lays it out better in more of a story than looking at the statements.
Okay, so I guess that gets into the next question. If I go to my accounting software, which reports am I pulling to tell me these numbers? Melody, do you want to tell me what you think I'm pulling?
Um, I don't rely just on reports out of there. I like custom things because I like to see the specifics for maybe a class or a program
Mm-hmm.
or other things. So I may not be the best one to answer that from
Okay.
the big picture because I dive deep into specific questions.
Okay, and that might also, as we get into the budgeting by class sometimes lets you say we got into the restricted versus unrestricted funds. So if I have funds that are allocated towards a specific area, I want to see that in my profit and loss where we're spending or in my cash allocation so you know how much you have available. Okay, but back to the reports. Jim, which reports are you pulling?
Um, I agree with Melody about the customized reports. One report that we like to provide to clients is what we call a rolling forecast.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is it takes your accrual-based P&L
Mm-hmm.
and and then drops in your cash flow statement.
Okay.
Um, Nobody really knows how to read a cash flow statement. It's
No,
it's
agreed.
very tough. It's very challenging. It's confusing. The numbers sometimes go the other way. But if you can put them into combine those reports into one, and the way that we sort of set them up is that we take our actuals year to date, forecast out the rest of the year, compare that to the annual budget, and then show our variances. So you can make decisions based
Mm-hmm.
off of the activity and the projections that are going to happen. And the same with the cash. Forecast out your cash. You're gonna if you're gonna fund fixed assets, well, they don't flow into the P&L, but it's a decrease in cash. You're gonna pay down a line of credit, or you're gonna take out money in your line of credit. Show all those funds in that bottom section, but really just like a one-page snapshot for the full year and or through the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Oftentimes, that one report accompanied by a narrative
Mm-hmm.
are reports that we would use for board meetings. Just
Mm-hmm.
those two reports.
That's good. That keeps it simpler. Lena, what would you have people look at?
I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point, Jim. My favorite living document is the budget to actual report.
Yeah.
It tells such a great story throughout the year. You have your budget broken down by month, and then you can add in your actual revenues and expenses by month. You should update them monthly. You should view them frequently. It flags any overspending or underperforming income, and it's just such a great document to have. And you can share it with your board. You can share it with your staff, keeps
Mm-hmm.
them in line. It's by far my favorite document to keep on hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do that too. What we have is a template that Panina, who heads our bookkeeping division, created, which has that budget to actual and then forecasts it out percentage wise how much we have remaining for the year, and then we just take the balance sheet out of the software and we take the profit and loss out of the software. So those are my two favorite reports, profit and loss and balance sheet. Plop them in there and then it does all the calculations and formulas because then we don't have to think. And I like not having to think because if I think I'm going to make mistakes, and then we don't have to manipulate data errors either. So that makes it easier. So, what I want you to do for your action item for your homework is I want you to identify for your company what are the numbers that you want to reference and how frequently or do you want to reference them? You want to be checking it monthly, quarterly, before board meetings. I would probably suggest monthly. but some people might want to do it on a weekly basis. So what are you looking at and how frequently do you want to be doing that? Make sure you also have access to them. If you don't have access to them, it won't help you. Um, okay. Any questions before we move on to the budget? We will have time at the end for Q&A. Any specific questions upon before we move on to budget development? Okay, budget development. I get so many questions about budgeting. I think we all do. Nonprofit budgeting is complicated. I do not want it to be complicated. I want it to tell the story of what are you trying to do. Now, we're starting to work on preparing 2026 budgets. The first question is, what programming are you trying to do? And then developing the budget that shows what programming you're trying to do because it's what do you need to do it. Then we get into there are lots of different formats and things like that. I know what I use. I'm curious, Lena, if you can share what are the best budgets that you've seen developed for nonprofits and what are some good practices or things not to do?
Yeah, so I think there are some general tips. I know that orgs want to be perceived as ambitious, but I think a realistic budget is far more valuable than an ambitious one. I think that every line item should connect back to programs and capacity as much as you can do that, line it up. A line, I'm sorry. Uh,
Yeah, you can continue.
um,
Hmm.
align budget categories with your chart of accounts. Make your life easier by doing that as much as you can. And please, going back to the broken record part, please include a tab in your worksheet for a budget to actuals. I think that that's
Hmm.
critical.
Yeah, so it needs to, I usually like to have it correlate to your chart of accounts. Whatever you're using in your bookkeeping software, that's what you're using in your budget.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Jim, what are some things that you also are best practices, things to avoid?
Yeah, I agree about tying it into your chart of accounts. And your chart of accounts depend upon the structure of the organization. If you're heavy on federal grants or in education, there's different reports that you have to file. Um, Maximize your general ledger system by tying it into your budget and utilizing your chart of accounts effectively. Um, it's I've seen many different versions of budgets of clients and how they want to do it. One client in particular, I really liked how they did it, and I do try and model many of my clients and offer that advice. And it's a little bit different than what Lena said. It's um, divvy out your budgets by department by grant and give a pie in the sky expense lines so that it's a first draft. It's not realistic because you don't have the money to fund all those programs and initiatives that you want to do. But it's things that your program directors, your department leaders, things they would love to do, and then you start scaling back based off of that realistic, um, um, you know, I the reality that you're not going to be able to fund all that stuff. So, but the key there is the one thing I said is divvy it out. Don't have one person responsible for the budget. Have your program directors own it. Have your department leaders own it. Provide it to them, and that is their work plan. That is their guide for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and that kind of ties into the next question, which is how do you create a budget that's accurate when the amount of funding is variable? So I know you said go for a pie in the sky. Um, Melody, what would you potentially add to that?
I love what Jim was talking about with having different budget holders and accountability because that's where you really get the big bang out of the budget is if people understand how the pieces fit together. And
Hmm.
I have seen a number of organizations that that's the key to their agility because while we talked about budget to actual, those budget holders are going to know pieces finance doesn't. And if we really use the budget to tell the story and compare it to what's actually happening, we can potentially identify shifts and react sooner than rather than later to things. So I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, I'll support that also. Um, And then, I mean, now let's throw restricted and unrestricted funds into the mix. So, Lena, now we have this budget that we may or may not know how much money we're getting. And we're definitely tying it back programmatically. But now we're adding in restricted and unrestricted funds also. How do we budget? What would you suggest?
I would suggest keeping restricted and unrestricted funds as separate as possible.
Hmm.
Um, in your worksheets, in your files, everywhere you can, because in the bank and your checking account, they're going to be together. So everywhere else, keep them separate. And also tie, if you know known expenses that go with a restricted fund, put that in your paperwork as well, like tie the expenses to it. There's just so many ways that you want to keep it separate. And that's just so key because it's easy to accidentally use funds from one grant for other things. And then you think, well, in the future, I'll separate that out. So just keeping really clean books is just the highest priority.
Yeah, and this I tend to do using the classes and whatever your accounting software is. That way you have it spread out so that when you have money that comes in specifically for that, it's kind of like it's a program. It's a mini profit and loss. I can see the expenses for that. Yes, it makes more work on the bookkeeping side, but it's the only way to keep funds straight that way. Um, Another thing that I usually suggest is creating scenarios. A lot of times, let's say when you're applying for grants and funders want to know how much money they want to give you, you can say, well, my operating budget is 500,000, but we want to do this venture, which will cost us 250, or this one that will cost us 150, including those as like potential items, or maybe you're just fundraising and you don't know if you're going to get 200,000 or $1 million by allocating per program with the classes, then you're able to um, predict what might happen and then be able to scale back and change your operations because everything, as everyone said, gets tied back to the program level. I have another question for you, Lena. No, sorry, Melody. Um, how closely do you need to stick to the budget? Like once it's passed, right? You have this thing, you don't really know what's going to happen, how much money is going to come in. Do I need to stick to those exact numbers? How flexible is it?
It's interesting because I'm old enough and taught higher education for a while that we always taught the budget was the line in the sand and you can't change it. I don't hold to that anymore because the world is just changing too rapidly. Now, I'm still a firm believer in not just changing it randomly, that there needs to be a significant shift in the assumptions or the underlying things that went into that. But I mean, if you look at, for instance, the years of during the pandemic or some of the pullback on funding, those are big shifts, and we need to adjust the budget to accommodate that and reflect that we're responding to that.
Yeah, that is good. Lena, would you add anything on that?
Yeah, I tend to, after all the years of working with budgets, I tend to look at it more as a living document that can evolve and change with time within, certain reigns. So I don't really look at it as a static report. And you can even, in your budget, you can even weight potential grant or donor funds, like give it a likelihood percentage. So say you applied for a $10,000 grant and you think there's a 50% chance that you'll get it, put that in as a $5,000 grant. Of course, that's projections and it's not real revenue yet, but you can really have fun with the budget and make it flexible. But you have to understand the rules of that going in, knowing that it's a budget and it's not actual.
Yes, it is your guideline.
Yep.
Okay, so your homework item is take a look at your budget and revise it to include the best practices that we just talked about. So, project-based, tying it to that, making sure you're having the input, having a master chart of accounts, that kind of thing. Anything that you gain from here that you're not doing that you can be doing. And I'll include this in the email that I put out also with the tips. All right, any questions specifically on budget before we move on to the next section? Okay, again, we will have Q&A at the end. Next section, we move into protecting your organization. And we have a little poll from that about which steps have you taken so far to protect your organization? So I've really put in the federal and state filings and the managing risk and insurance into one section because they're all about protection. And I think, Mike, you're going to have probably have a lot to say on the protection that your organization needs to have. But there's that compliance point of view. The government just loves making it complicated for all the things you need to do to stay in compliance in different states. And nonprofits especially have to make sure to stay in compliance or else they could lose their 501(c)(3) status. And which filings do I need to do? And when do I need to do it? And I just again, like the government should just hire everybody a part-time person to take care of it all because it's a big load. Um, and then there's the insurance aspect of it. Anytime you're putting yourself out there, you're putting yourself at risk. And I think, Mike, you're probably the best person to talk about this also. We want to maintain transparency. We want people to be able to trust us. We want to have the good status. We want to be in good standing. We also, if something happens, we don't want it to hurt us. We don't want it to destroy the organization. So just like you have health insurance and car insurance and home insurance, you also need nonprofit insurance. Let's talk a little bit about well, we have some ideas here about some steps people have done, what you need to do, but let's get a little more in depth about it. Um, Mike, I am going to hand it over to you right now and ask you the question of what do you think nonprofits need to be doing and thinking about from a filing perspective, also from a risk and insurance. We're going to kind of combine these sections, perspective in order to keep them as safe and healthy as they can.
Yes. And I'll actually let Melody talk more about the filing.
Yes.
But my first piece of advice would be to build your team, and your team really should include an accountant, an attorney, um, an insurance advisor, and I'm just trying to think what else from a protection standpoint. But those would be, I would say, the three key team members to make sure that you are protected from a legal, a tax, and an insurance standpoint. Um, there are all kinds of risks that you're exposed to, both as a leader, an organization, as well as if you have a board of directors. I have served on several board of directors, and there's always potential risks that the board is even exposed to. Um, and really educating your board of directors as well around the risks that they're exposed to, train the board, make sure the board is following all the guidelines, etc. But build that team out, both consult with each one of the team members individually, but also get everyone in a room together and make sure that your team is working in conjunction with one another. They should not be strangers to one another. They should have ongoing communications because they'll be able to serve you much better in that capacity.
Okay. And I don't know, what kinds of things do we need to be having? Just like if I have my checklist, I know we need D&O insurance. That's like
Mhm.
a must, right?
D&O, general liability, um, if you have employees, workers' comp, um, cyber, cybersecurity insurance. That's a big one, and it's so commonly overlooked now. Um, but I would say those are the key insurance policies that really any organization, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, should have in place right away.
Hmm. Even though it costs money. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so Melody, going into the filings thing, what are things that people need to be thinking about?
I am with you. We need to have a person who just focuses on this because so many things have made this even more complex.
Yes.
The federal filing, in my opinion, is the easy one because you're dealing with one entity.
Yeah.
The problem is the states. And what has complicated the state filings is that every state is different, including some states who have no requirements.
Mhm.
But you are complacent to look at the filing requirements where you're incorporated, where you have a physical location, where you meet donation limitations according to that state or have to be registered to solicit contributions. And now, as well, with remote employees, that also comes in as a factor into compliance and where you have to file. Those are the big ones that I always advise around of looking to see for each of those states what are the requirements. Um, but they're not all the same, and it's not the easiest thing to do.
That is true. What I now with AI, I use Claude. Claude is my best friend. I like it better than ChatGPT. Um, I just asked Claude, I have a client. They've started off in New York. They're hiring somebody in Maryland. What are the things that I need to file? And then it tells me, which is very kind of it. Of course, don't trust AI, always verify, but it's a good starting point. The things you need to think about are the actual state filing, and then if you're getting donations. So that's one thing that is really commonly, most people don't realize they need to file a specific thing for people who get donations.
I
Lena,
recommend once a year that you take your donor database and sort it by state and look at the concentrations and the numbers because that will help you then determine what states you might need to comply with.
yeah. Lena, are there any other filings or tips and tricks to make it not so overwhelming?
Yeah, so, I think we all know about scheduling on the calendar, so you know your deadlines and things like that. And I
Mhm.
agree that the state charity and fundraising registrations and renewals, and then the state annual reports, which is actually a corporate filing, are critical. And then there's some local business filings that happen. If you're in certain cities or counties, you might have to register for a business license or file for a sales tax exemption on that level too. So if you just know everything you need to do every year, and you have it on the calendar and you research if it's now the Attorney General instead of the Secretary of State because they have different entities by state. It's very, once you get that cleared up, the process is not nearly as daunting. And then I do have one tip. If you do end up filing for an extension on your Form 990, go ahead and file for an extension at the state level too, because even though you may get your Form 990 in time to meet the other deadline, if you go ahead and file extensions across the board, you'll be safer with that.
Yeah, that is a good tip. Which is, by the way, homework item number 3 is creating a compliance calendar with all your filing deadlines and assigning responsibility for each one. So it's a one-time lift, and then you don't have to think about it. It's on a calendar. Remember, I am all pro not thinking. We do it once, and then we have a list of something that we can maintain. Um, do you see any mistakes that people are commonly making with their 990s or filings or things like that, Jim?
Um, the one thing that I think nonprofits lack um, when it comes to the 990 is identifying their programming within it. So utilize your 990 as a marketing tool for your organization. There's information that you can enter in there, the first page or first or second page, whatever it is. Quickly, it highlights what you've accomplished. So use it to your advantage. So that's the one thing that I will say about, not getting into the numbers and the details around. Hopefully they're accurate but just really use it to your advantage. And utilize Schedule O, which is just an expansion on some of the telling the story behind the numbers.
Why? Who's looking at 990?
Funders, first and foremost.
Okay.
You're on a charitable registration for whatever state you're in. If they're interested in funding you, the astute funders are going to go look at your 990.
That is fascinating. I did not know that. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Lena, would you have anything else that you would add?
Yeah, I would comment about the Schedule O as well. There's so much you can explain there. It's a great tool to have. I think there are a lot of things that can potentially go wrong with the Form 990 if you're not following the instructions. But there's this one thing that's sometimes overlooked, and that's including the mission statement. It's in part one, line one of the document. And like Jim said, potential and future funders are going to look at your previous Form 990s, and that's the first thing they're going to want to see if they're in alignment with what you're doing. So it's really important to include that and make it really short and clever so that you can garnish attention from that.
Nice. I like that. Okay. Lena, is there anything else? I mean, sorry, Melody, is there anything else that you would add?
I agree with exactly what they're saying as a marketing tool. I actually advise clients to put it right on their own website because if we want to demonstrate accountability and transparency, it's a public document anyhow. Why shouldn't I be the one that's making it easily accessible on my own site?
That's a good idea. Okay. All
And
right.
Dina,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also important just to highlight something that was recently released in at least the local news in the state of Maryland. But
Mm-hmm.
the Baltimore County Chamber of Commerce closed its doors back in August.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key reasons as to what led them to their ultimate demise was that they had not filed a 990 since 2018, and
Really?
they actually lost their nonprofit tax exemption status.
Oh, wow. And theirs
So,
probably wasn't even a hard one to do.
right. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, I mean it is so important to get this right.
Yeah, I think if you don't do it for 3 years, that's when they kick you out, right?
Hmm.
And
Well,
even if you're, hmm
Dina, the one distinction there, though, is there's three levels of 990s, and the
yes,
one that gets missed is the 990N, which is below 50,000. And
yes.
that's the one they won't let you know you didn't file it. If you don't file for 3 years, it's just gone. Your status
Oh,
is gone.
wow.
And I see that a lot with like local sports teams and those kind of things where you've got turnover of leadership and there's
Yeah.
not good communication on what the expectations are.
Yeah, that's true. I've been involved in a lot of those little things, and part of my responsibility and treasure was to file the 990. But I think one of them hadn't been filed for 2 years, so I caught it on the third. Even if you are a small company, even if you have no revenue, you file the 990 postcard or N or whatever it's called. It is so easy. You just say, I had less than this amount in revenue. End of story. Press submit. That's it. It's very easy. So we want to make sure you're all doing that. Okay, thank you. It's a good point. Moving on to a little bit the risk aspect of it. Um, I could spend a lot of money on insurance. There's 1,000 different types of insurances I can get. Which ones make sense? Like, what are the different points? Like, when do I get cybersecurity? When do I not? When do I get an E&O? When do I not? Um, I don't know. I don't know who's most qualified to take this question. Who has answers for that?
I just will say
Yeah,
every nonprofit should have DNO. So,
that
and
everyone needs to have. Give an
everyone needs to
expense.
have it.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, that's the first thing is everyone needs to have it. As for the rest, I guess I'll let Mike take some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I leave that to my insurance advisor friends within my network. Um, I mean, that's the key. You want to work with an insurance advisor that really has your best interest. They understand your organization, um, and they can recommend what types of policies to have, what limits to have on these policies. It really needs to be customized to you and your organization.
Okay. So basically, find a real estate agent if you don't have one, talk to them. So I'm putting for your homework
I'm a
again.
fan of
Hmm.
doing DNO or not DNO, I'm sorry, cybersecurity for everybody, at least going through the practice, because there's so much risk there now that working with that trusted insurance advisor is a huge risk management standpoint too, of helping you identify and know the tipping points of when you want to reconsider.
Interesting. Okay, right. Because sometimes, like, we don't feel like we have much risk, but then it might change. So we should definitely be having this conversation on an annual basis with whoever your trusted insurance person is. So homework item is to review your insurance policy with the trusted advisor, identify any gaps, and schedule an annual insurance review. This is not just an extra expense I'm telling you to put on there. This is something that can make your organization crumble if you have a lawsuit or something that is going to destroy you. And we need to
Dina,
take.
I would
Mhm.
describe it as a spare tire. It's
Yeah.
better to have it and not need it than rather than need it and not have it.
Yes, because then you're really up a creek. And
Hmm.
then when you have a problem, you can contact your insurance company and they'll help you and you're not out a lot of money. I have had companies that didn't have the insurance, were subpoenaed, taken to court, something, spent an awful lot of their donor money on something that they could have avoided if they just had that insurance policy in place. Okay, moving on to our working board, which, there's so much we could talk about developing working boards. So, thinking about our programming for next year, I have some ideas. We'll love to hear everyone else's ideas. But what I want to talk about is how do you make your board work for you? We have a little poll here also. If you can just tell us about how much your organization, your board is helping you. There are inactive boards. I currently have one, but I'm really happy with it that way right now because in the younger phases of an organization, you don't really want the board getting in your way. However, as you're getting bigger, you want the board to be doing things for you, not just sitting here and giving orders, but actively contributing towards your mission, whether it's contributing skills, whether it's contributing a network, whether it's helping fundraise, whether they're giving guidance. They should be giving you something to help your organization be better. I know, Melody, you have a lot to say on board development, and Mike, I know you have a lot to say on board development. Actually, you probably all have a lot to say on board development. So let's just talk about what makes a good board member that you should be looking for. Melody, I'll start with you.
I highly encourage nonprofits to start off by creating a matrix of what skill sets they want on the board and what demographics, because you want to represent your community as well as have that expertise that you need. For some, it is the fundraising. For others, maybe it is a different legal perspective in addition to your attorney, or maybe it is something that's a program expertise, because then that helps you to determine what the context of your board is. Because if you put the right people in the right seats, it makes it easier then for them to engage in their expertise areas and actually benefit the nonprofit.
So I'm going to go back a step. How do I determine what skill sets I want on there?
That goes back to mission
Okay.
and strategic planning of what are you planning to do? What's your mission and what's your strategic plan for the next year to 3 years? And what are the areas that you really need assistance on? There's usually a gap, some kind of professional gap or knowledge gap that's where you can rely on a board member.
Okay, so we know what our mission is, basically identifying what do I need that I don't have, whether it's knowledge or funding or whatever it is, and try to find people to do that. Okay. All right, Mike, what would you add to that?
So I love Melody's board member matrix. That is so great, and it's so instrumental in building a diverse board of directors. Um, Someone said to me, and I'm going to steal this or borrow this.
Hmm.
Everyone has one of and or three things that they can offer: time, talent, treasure.
Hmm.
So time is, probably folks that can't contribute a lot of money, but they can contribute their time. And that is very important in building a board. A talent, if you have a specific mission and there is an expert in a specific area that can really add value to your organization regarding being on a board, you want to attract, recruit, and retain that type of person. And then, like we said at the very first question, there needs to be the lifeblood that's coming in. So your top donors. Um, they may want to be on the board. If they're giving, then that means they're aligned with your mission. And the more people that you can get on your board that are aligned with the vision and the mission, the better. I would also say any board member that you're bringing on, if you are building a true working board, setting expectations up front is so key. And you have to set the expectations. So if there is a minimum requirement, if you will, to be on your board, whether that is showing up to events, committee meetings, whatever it may be, set up a participation rate. Like you have to attend 80% of our fundraising events in a year. You may put some sort of dollar number that each board needs to contribute $5,000, towards a donation to help fund our mission. But make sure you're setting these expectations up front, because otherwise, if they're not, there's going to be disappointment on both sides. There's going to be disappointment on your end that the board member is not doing what you need them to do. But the board member also is disappointed because they may have felt like I really wanted to give, but I didn't realize this is what was expected of me.
Yeah, that tends to go a lot for what I say is like over communicate, make sure it's very clear what you're supposed to do. Some people like doing volunteer job descriptions and making a job description for the board position so that they know what their responsibilities are. That kind of gets into like what happens, like how do you manage performance? Can you kick off a board member if they're not doing what they're supposed to, or if they're being poisonous? I know sometimes, I mean, especially with volunteers, it comes up frequently that people are not happy with how the volunteer is performing. So what happens when a board member isn't performing? What do you do then? I mean, the board member, I'm just going to add, is you have to have a board in order to have a nonprofit. So if we're going to have a board, we want to make them work for you. It could be access to free resources, but when they're creating problems, then that's really hurting your company. What are the
Mhm.
problems that we want to avoid, and how do we avoid them?
Hmm.
Uh,
I mean, I,
I'll
I could speak to this as well.
go ahead.
The problems can come in many, many forms. So I would say uh, a problem um, is they could represent or potentially cause a conflict of interest.
Hmm.
So I would make sure that every board member signs a conflict of interest waiver at the very beginning before serving on your board of directors. You have to determine what the conflict of interests may be, but make sure that they understand that these are the conflicts, and you understand that if you were to participate in anything that would be deemed as a conflict of interest, we could ask you to leave our board of directors. Another thing that every board member should know is that in anything that they are doing, that they are representing your organization. They are an extension of the organization. They should always act in the best interest of the organization. A lot of board members don't realize that.
Interesting.
And yeah,
Yeah.
and then I would say lastly, when it comes to board members that are, let's say, not pulling their weight,
Hmm.
have one-on-one conversations with folks. Don't do it over email. Don't call them out in a group setting or in a board meeting. Just pick up the phone. You never know what someone else is going through. Um, and a lot of times you'll find out either they didn't know what the expectation was, or there's something going on in their personal life that when they thought they could commit due to whatever's going on, they just they can't make the sacrifice right now, and have grace.
Okay. Thank you. Jim, what did you want to add?
There's three duties, right? Duty of care, loyalty, and obedience in a nonprofit,
Uh-huh.
and then also add in the fiduciary responsibility. They are
Uh-huh.
the quote unquote owners of. There are no owners of nonprofits, but the board is the representation of the
Yeah.
nonprofit. I think that there's two extremes of nonprofit boards. There's one that is absent, and there's one that is overextending. And finding that balance is key to a successful organization and a successful board. Their role is to guide the executive director, right? They prepare a budget, the board approves it. The executive director is supposed to abide by that budget, live and coordinate themselves with their team accordingly. So I think it's finding that right balance of people who are going to do that. And I don't know which one's worse, absent or overstanding boards.
I think
They're
overextending is worse because then they're stopping progress from happening. Like I've been in organizations when it's like you just need to do this, but they can't get the board to agree on anything, so therefore nothing happens. Whereas if you don't have a participating board, you could make things happen. You're not bottlenecked. That's my opinion.
100% agree, Dina. I'd rather have an absent board member than one who is monopolizing everyone's time.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add to this, I love everything that's being said, but boards should be doing evaluations. I mean, we have performance evaluations for employees, and board members have those duties Jim mentioned, and it's significant. They should be evaluating their own performance.
Do you ever see any boards doing that? Like, is that a thing people do? All right, so then let's add in member evaluation. I also see a good practice is like don't add people on for life. Like have re-elect people on a 1 year, 2 year basis. So you could have a natural off ramp for somebody because they're just not re-elected. If they're non-performing, then you don't have to get into drama, things like that. Um, before we leave off for Q&A, Lena, do you have anything else to add to this particular topic?
I was going to basically add what you just added about having a rotating board and even if they're like let's say that the president or a secretary, maybe demoting them just to a member so they're still active but they're not making executive decisions.
Yeah. Like yes, PTAs have that mandate. You're not allowed to serve more than a 3 year term. And then you also get new ideas, new blood, new excitement. So it just creates a lot more channel for change.
And Dina,
Oh, mhm.
one thing we did not discuss is bylaws, but really make sure that your bylaws are up to date and in line with all the things that we're talking about here.
That is true, which we did not get into. That will have to be a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'll comment unless the absent board members don't hold the irresponsible executive directors accountable. Yeah, that'll be a problem too. So we want a working board. We want that. That is the ideal. So your action item is to draft or revise your board job descriptions to include specific time commitments and expectations. That is that homework item. All right. And let us move to Q&A. Does anybody have any questions for our wonderful panel? Who thank you so much for all being here. Um, and also, if you haven't yet seen our YouTube channel, we do have all the recordings on there for past ones. Also, we do have our our fundraising and marketing and branding one coming up in November. And I'll also be putting out an email if everybody can give me ideas and suggestions of what you want to see in our programming for next year. Also, before you all hop off, I do have a feedback question. If you can give us some feedback, it is anonymous. We would appreciate it. Thank you. Any questions from anybody? No? All right, Benjamin. And I'm going to stop recording so that you don't need to have your Q&A.